Oh, my hair is like all a mess. Catch me doing my hair. Nope, that's bad. Wait, over here. Hi.
Right. We're on.
I'm doing my hair. I know. I'm doing my hair. Isn't that lovely?
Yeah.
It was all, I realized when I looked at the camera, it was all a mess. So,
a little windy outside.
Yes, it is. Which means we may have a little bit of difficulty with our stream, although it seems fine right now, so who knows?
How long it will last.
This is a mystery. It depends on how the elves are feeling today as to how this is going to work.
Yes.
Okay, so this is Robin. I'm Ruth, and this is Oreo, and we are all on A Mirror Darkly, Unbridled Inquiry. And we would like to welcome you today. We're going to talk about what would Jesus do. And I think you may be a little surprised about the answer to that, because what people think Jesus would do is not necessarily what he actually did. So anyway, we run the show in 10-minute segments. So if you have a comment or a question or a show idea, just pop it into the comments, either in YouTube or in Facebook, and I've got them right here. And at the end of the 10-minute segment, we will respond to your comment, question, whatever it is. So,
yes.
Anyway,
Lower the barrier.
Yes.
Okay.
And share us on Facebook so that with friends that you think might be interested.
Right.
Okay, so let's get busy.
The fundamental problem with the question, what would Jesus do, is that it opens itself up for historical anachronism quite easily. It's kind of like asking, and you see this in the news and pundits all the time, well, what would Thomas Jefferson say about this particular president or this particular activity? And it's like, well, he lived a long time before any of this stuff had happened. He doesn't have the background or the historical context, so it's irrelevant, and you can't guess. That is, you're practicing mind reading, and that's the problem with this question.
Right. Well, and mean tweets, he would be like, what's a tweet?
Yes.
This is phenomenal that you guys can do this. I don't care what you say, it's awesome that you can do it. So
yes.
Mean tweets, nice tweets, he'd be all about the tweets.
Yeah.
Well, he liked new things, too.
He liked new things, and so he would have been utterly fascinated by the underlying technology.
Yep.
And probably pay more attention to that than what happened to be going on a given day.
He created the dumbwaiter because
yes.
he liked to have late night snacks. And after in the book I read to the kids, it says servants, but they're obviously slaves, went back to where they lived, he would be hungry at night, and it was hard to carry his food and drink all the way up the stairs to his room. So he invented the dumbwaiter. So he would make his snack, put it in the dumbwaiter, go upstairs, pull it up to him, and he spilled less, too, that way.
Yes. And the fact that tweets are mean and nasty would not bother him in the least, because that's what they were to each other's faces back then. I mean, they still had dueling. You have the Secretary of the Treasurer being shot and killed by the Vice President not too long after that.
Spoiler alert, if you watch Hamilton,
yes,
you'll get to witness it.
But yeah, and you have people beating each other up in the Congress, and some poor guy was almost crippled by being beaten by somebody's cane. So yeah, they were not nice to each other. Being mean to each other is nothing new. So from that standpoint, nothing has changed.
Just millions of people didn't see it because there wasn't a 24-hour news cycle. There were no social media platforms. The only social media platform was the guy in the street yelling, "Hear ye, hear ye!"
Or the newspapers and pamphlets that were getting printed.
The town criers
and slower.
And the housewives gossiping across the fence.
Yeah, they were actually more creative sometimes in some of the mean things they would say about one another. So the lack of creativity, I think, is one of the bigger problems with a lot of social media. That is, it's, just strings of cussing or saying you're stupid and your mother dressed you. I mean, it's just not creative. Go back to the way look at the campaign between Adams and Jefferson. But anyway, this is a little beside the point. My point is that there's a thing called Quest for the Historical Jesus. There have been three main periods of time in history when this sort of thing happened. The first one was back, where'd it go? With Albert Schweitzer back in the 19th century, or 18th century, 19th century? 19th century. And you've had a couple more since then. And the primary criticism of the quest for historical Jesus is, number one, we don't have a lot of historical records. All we have is what we see in the New Testament. And then you have some post-exilic writings that show up. But the difficulty with the quest for historical Jesus is those that go on the quest end up finding someone that looks remarkably like themselves. That is, they decide that Jesus had the same attitudes and outlooks and beliefs that they have. And that often is the case. Same thing with historical figures. That is, going back to Thomas Jefferson, what would Thomas Jefferson say about Joseph Biden? Well, if you're a Republican, then you would assume that Jefferson would hate him. If you're a Democrat, you would assume that Jefferson would love him. It has nothing to do with what Thomas Jefferson would actually think.
Well, like you said, the problem is mind reading.
Yes, your mind reading. That's the essence of the problem with this question, is that you are a believer in mind reading. That is, you can somehow discern what this particular individual thought or thinks. We see that all the time with pundits and how they interpret the thinking of various political figures. That is, we imagine that this political figure is thinking or imagining or doing, or he's motivated by such and such. Unless you're a mind reader, you have no idea why this individual did what he or she did. And to assume that you can magically mind read them, and mind read them in such a way that works to your advantage, which is inevitably the case, that is, whatever political perspective you have, you use your mind reading to bludgeon your
I think
opponents.
Part of the problem is, though, people don't realize that's what they're doing.
Yes,
you
they
keep
don't.
referring to mind reading like as if they're doing it on purpose.
No, I know they're not doing it on purpose.
But it's the
Human
assuming
assumptions.
you know why somebody did something is mind reading.
Right.
So if you unless the person actually says this is why I did it, or this is what I was thinking when I did it, and actually a good example of that is Dr. Phil when he is talking to usually a child who is like rebellious or having issues and does something aggressive or whatever towards their adult, their parent or grandparent. He'll say, what were you thinking that gave you permission to do that? Because he's not going to presume to mind read on them. He's asking them, what exactly did you say to yourself that made it okay for you to do that? So those are the more important questions that should be asked of politicians, any kind of public figure, like
or historical figures.
Right. Well, it's a little
Except
hard
you can't
to
ask them.
But that's why primary sources are so important, because you do kind of get inside their heads. You know a little bit more about what their motivations are and why they're doing things. So reading autobiographies and
Their letters and
letters and
speeches
things like
all
that.
those
Yeah.
things.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we want to visit all the presidential libraries, because you get a lot of that. We've now gone to the Nixon and Reagan libraries primarily
close
because
by.
they're close.
Yes.
Our next goal, hopefully next summer, is to go to the 3 presidential libraries in Texas. So that'll nail down 5 of the 15. So, but eventually we would like to go to all 15 of them.
Yep.
And
That
that's
would
the
be
primary
interesting.
reason why. Yeah, of course, they're going to show the positive side. It's a museum and there's curators, and they're going to put the positive side out there. But they covered Watergate at the Nixon Library, and
Iran-Contra
at Reagan. Yeah, so it's not all,
How wonderful this individual is. They just say, this is what happened during this person's term of office. And here's the documents and the pictures and the videos and
letters
and bits and pieces of interesting things.
Yes.
So when you ask what would Jesus do, that's perhaps really not the best question. I like to bring up Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy just because I like the book, but also you have that one episode where you have the people come to the huge computer and ask it, oh, great computer, what is the purpose of life, the universe, and everything? And the computer says, we'll come back in 10 million years and I'll give you an answer. And so 10 million years go by, they come back and ask the computer, deep thought, what is the purpose of life, the universe, and everything? And the computer says, I don't think you're going to like the answer. Doesn't matter, we want to hear the answer. Okay, but you're not going to like it. What's the answer? 42. They don't like it. And then the computer says, well, I think the problem is you're not asking the right question. And that's often the case as human beings. We don't ask the right question. The right question is not what would Jesus do, but what did Jesus teach? Because with that, we can get an answer, because that's what the biblical text is designed to tell us. That is, John tells us what the purpose of his gospel, that is, his accounting of Jesus' life was, that we would know that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him we would have everlasting life. That's the sole purpose of the gospel that John wrote, and that's basically the purpose of any of the 4 gospel accounts. And so asking beyond that is kind of going beyond the point of the information that we actually have. So we were given information about who Jesus is and what he taught. And beyond that, it's a guess. And so when you think in terms of what would Jesus do, you can look and see what did Jesus do. And so, for instance, one of the things he does, and this is very early in the Gospel of John, it moves around in the Gospels because the Gospels are not giving us a chronological accounting of Jesus' life. It's more arranged thematically. And so for John's Gospel, it fits in quite nicely at chapter 2. And it says that in the temple courts, Jesus found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. This is John chapter 2, verse 14. It goes on. So Jesus made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. So, what would Jesus do? Well, sometimes he made a whip and chased people with it, and chased animals with it, and overturned tables, and just made a huge mess of things. And it's not necessarily, what people would think for an answer to what would Jesus do. That is, when people ask that question, they think, well, he'll be good and kind and loving and gentle and meek and mild. And no, it doesn't necessarily work that way. Again, there's a tendency for human beings to make gods in their own image, and we do it with, that is, Christians will do it with the God that's revealed in Scripture. That is, they remake the God that's revealed there into a God that they are more comfortable with.
Right. And if you think about it, because Jesus is the shepherd and we are the sheep, and if you think about it, if there are wolves, a shepherd's not going to try to reason with the wolves and say, oh, wolves, there's other sheep you can have. You don't want my sheep. No, the shepherd kills the wolves, and they have like David had a slingshot, and most shepherds
and he even boasts about the fact that he had killed a bear and he had killed a lion, and he said, the same thing's going to happen to Goliath now.
Right. And so that's basically what Jesus was doing, was killing the wolves that were in the temple, because they were taking advantage of poor people and people that didn't have sacrifices to offer.
Yeah, they would say, your money's not good enough here. Here, you've got to exchange your Roman currency for this proper temple currency.
I was going to ask you, did it originally start because like the Caesar's picture was on the coin and he was considered a god,
right?
And because of their history with idolatry, so rather than having Roman coins in there, it started out like, okay, you give us you give us 10 cents worth of Roman coins, we'll give you 10 cents worth of temple coins, but then it became a profit-making industry.
Right.
Okay, so I think that's important to point out too. because, like, for example, people that are recovering alcoholics, if you go to their house, they're going to offer you things like soda and water and juice. They're not going to offer you beer. And that's not wrong. It's just they had an issue with that, and so that's what they need to do. They might, well, to put it in, to make it more go with the story, like they might ask you to put your can of beer on a shelf, and then they'll give you a can of soda and replace it for it or whatever.
Right.
I mean, nobody does that, but
No, but that's a good analogy.
Right,
Or at
but
least it's an
if it
analogy.
was corrupt, they would ask you to say bring a beer and $1, and they would take the $1 and the beer and give you a soda.
Here, bring a 6-pack.
Yeah,
and
and
they'll
they'll give you one can of soda, right.
Of generic
Yeah,
store brand cola.
right, Sam's Club. So,
And then the same thing with the animals. That is, in the sacrificial system, animals are supposed to be without blemish, and so the temple would say, "Oh, your animal, here's a spot. Here, you've got to exchange it for this other animal here instead," and there'd be a huge markup on it. And so they used religious things as an excuse for making a profit and ripping people off, particularly ripping off the poor. And so this enraged Jesus, and he reacted in the way he did. But, yeah, what would Jesus do? I mean, it was a popular thing. It may still be. People would wear the little wristbands,
not so much anymore.
Yeah, WWJD. But, yeah, perhaps it's a fad that has faded. And it was well-intentioned. It's just that I don't think it's thought through well enough. And people would use it to essentially make their own agendas come to pass.
Right.
Which is always the case with anything like this when you're dealing with a historical figure and trying to say, well, what would this individual think or believe, or how would he respond to whatever is going on today?
Well,
and it's an unanswerable question.
I think if you use it to remind you to love God and to love people,
that would be fine.
That would be fine, because if you do everything through that filter, then you
will do what Jesus would do.
Yeah.
So it's the more fundamental question is
the motivation.
The motivation, that is, am I behaving in a loving fashion? That is the core of the biblical message, and I've repeated this over and over again, is to love your neighbor as yourself, or to do to others as you would have them do to you. And that is incredibly difficult. And the reason that we have everything else in the Bible besides that phrase is because of human nature being what it is. As you see it reflected, I've mentioned before, with the Good Samaritan story that Jesus gave to the religious teacher. The religious teacher asked Jesus, well, who's my neighbor? Mm-hmm. And he asked the question not because he wanted to make sure that he was kind to everybody. He wanted to be able to exclude people he didn't like. Mm-hmm. He wanted to have a very narrow definition of what neighbor was. And Jesus did not let him do that. But that's the problem. That is, we as human beings will take that phrase, love your neighbor as yourself, and we will try to define each of those terms in the sentence in a way that works for us best, so that we can do whatever we want and not get in trouble, which is the essence of legalism. I was just talking to my mother about that the reason, this is why lawyers exist. But yeah, we were talking about the tax code and how complicated it is, and part of that is just because it's complicated enough that if you have a good lawyer, you can do whatever it is you want and get away with not paying as much as you otherwise might.
And we just had this discussion too with our church treasurer. We were talking about our taxes as far as him being pastor and things like that, because he gets paid by the church, and there are certain laws that can be beneficial to pastors. And our treasurer said, well, is it the right thing to do? Well, it's certainly the legal thing to do. Just most people don't know about it because they don't have the money to hire a CPA or an attorney. And we were told by a CPA what things were available to pastors. And it's not huge things. It's not like, we're going to be making billions of dollars and, not paying any taxes. I mean, he's certainly never going to make billions of dollars.
Yeah.
But you never know. But anyway, but it wasn't anything like that. We're not trying to do anything shady.
Actually, I think people making minimum wage full time probably make more than I do.
Probably. So, but the point of what we were doing was to kind of ease our tax burden because because of the way the government views the pastor of a church. They're not an employee, so the church doesn't pay Social Security taxes and all that. He has to pay them himself.
Right.
So then there are other things that you can do that will kind of ease that tax burden a bit, because we've been getting kind of slammed kind of hard since now we're not supporting our kids and different things are going on, and so just kind of ease our tax burden a little bit. And so but he said, is that an okay thing to do? It's like, well, it's certainly legal. I guess if you have a personal conviction about it, maybe not, but it's legal. And that's, if the government doesn't like having those loopholes, they need to close them. And, if you have a legal loophole that you can use till they close it, use it.
Yeah.
Unless you have,
if you don't.
Right, unless you have a moral compunction about it and you just really like giving the government a lot of your money.
Yes.
So.
Anyway, so what would Jesus do? And it's impossible to tell in any given situation beyond the statement, again, do to others, you'd have them do to you. That's the fundamental thing, the core of the biblical message. That is, Jesus is very clear. For instance, in Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, in everything do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. And that phrase, law and the prophets, was the first century way of saying the Bible. So that sums up the Bible. And so when you interpret the Bible, when you interpret what Jesus did, what God does, what God asks of us, it always needs to be interpreted through that lens. And if you arrive at an interpretation that violates that commandment, then you've done something wrong in your interpretation, which is easy enough to do. People do that all the time, not necessarily maliciously. But if people aren't careful, if they don't keep that in mind, it's very easy to come up with some very odd interpretations of things and start deciding that there's certain classes or groups or individuals that it's okay to hate and be mean to. And that simply is not the case. Again, if you decide that, murdering your neighbor is a good idea, then you've missed something. And what's remarkable about it, too, is that this isn't unique to the New Testament. If you asked any of the rabbis of the time of Jesus the question, what is the greatest commandment, or what is the law all about, they'd have said exactly the same thing. Everyone would have said this. And yet, the people that would say this would go ahead and end up, having Jesus executed, arresting apostles, early Christians, persecuting them, hunting them down, trying to kill them. It's very easy to lose sight of what love your neighbor as yourself actually means.
Right.
People like to imagine that human beings are rational. They're more rationalizing.
Yes.
We can justify anything if we work at it long enough. And that's a sad commentary on us. So, what would Jesus do? Not necessarily what we would expect. Because we're not really good at loving our neighbor as ourselves. What we're good at is hating our neighbor, looking down on our neighbor, feeling superior to our neighbor. That's what we're best at as human beings. It sounds cold and cynical, but just pay attention to what's going on around you. Yep. Pay attention to how you react when you're driving and somebody cuts you off.
Guilty.
It is, we are fundamentally not always that nice. We get tired, we get grumpy, we get hungry, we get grumpy, we
get frustrated,
we get grumpy, we get disappointed, we get grumpy. It doesn't take much to make us become the opposite of what the verse intends for us to be. Being like Jesus is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
We're not good at it. It's not part of our nature anymore. Not since Adam and Eve made a poor choice in the Garden of Eden. We have been broken ever since.
So let's look at some practical application. Okay. So right now, one of the big divisions, which I would argue is probably more media generated than it is in people's personal lives, but let's talk about vax versus anti-vax. I don't mean justifying one or the other, but how people are treating each other. And I had a discussion today with somebody, and I told her, I said, I am very much in favor of choice. If you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. If you want to get a vaccine, get a vaccine. If you don't want to, don't. You have to understand that there's consequences for each of those actions,
yes,
just like in everything else, but it's your choice. So I have a friend who I asked them, I said, you don't have to answer my question, but it pertained to the conversation we were having. I asked her if she'd had a vaccination, and she said no. I didn't say anything else. I was just like, okay, because that just informed me more on what we were discussing. And I didn't say, well, you should get the vaccine or blah, blah, blah. The only time I do that is if somebody asks me about my experience with getting vaccinated or what vaccine that I have. And I was talking to somebody today who was vaccinated, and we were comparing the two vaccines with what we're kind of seeing that is coming out in the news about certain vaccines seeming to be more effective than others, and
yes,
boosters and that kind of thing. But if you can
we got
have...
the UCLA version of the vaccine.
Yeah, not the USC version. So, or the community college version. So, that what was I going to say?
About how we treat each other.
Right, yeah. And it's really just, I accepted her. I mean, she's vaccinated. My other friend wasn't. I accepted them. I don't preach at them about, oh, you should get a vaccine, or, oh, why did you choose? And I did ask the other person, because I said, well, the vaccine that I got, they just said, so do you want this vaccine? I'm like, oh, I don't know, whatever. There was a choice of two. They offered me the one, and I took it. To me, because there was no information about it, I got it as early as I possibly could.
Right.
She got the one that she could get.
Same with my mom. She got what was available.
Right. And what was interesting was, though, her daughter suffers from mental illness like our daughter, and she decided to have her daughter get the Johnson & Johnson because it was just one shot, and her daughter doesn't like shots. So she figured if she could get her in one shot, she wouldn't have to worry about trying to get her to take the second shot. So she got the one shot done. And so that was really the only decision that was made outside of vax or not vax. But so I don't have a problem. I do think it's a little silly when somebody's riding in their car with their mask on, and I always hope that they've just forgotten to remove it.
Yes, which is easy to do.
Right, especially in the wintertime. Like, it's not winter now, but when the winter time comes, I'm more likely to wear my mask because then my face doesn't get so cold.
Yes.
I've learned. But when it's hot out, I cannot wait to peel it off, especially if I've been teaching. My room is just ice cold because it's really hard to teach in a warm room with the mask on, because all the condensation from my talking gives me a sweat goatee right here. I tell the kids, oh, time to get rid of my sweat goatee, and I pull my mask off and go, Wark, and then put it back on. Because it just, all that condensation gets on there, and it just stays right there on my face like where a goatee would be if I had one. And so anyway, what was the point of that? Oh, about people wearing masks in the car by themselves.
Oh, yeah.
I do kind of judge them. It's like, really? Come on, you're alone. You can't give your own self the coronavirus.
Well, you're doing it behind their backs. So.
Yes, I am. So it's okay. They can't cure me. They don't know I'm judging them. I'm just driving along.
Yes.
So
again, we were very bad at doing to others as we'd have them do to you.
Hey, you know what? If I'm wearing my mask alone in a car, feel free to judge me, because I'm either too old and demented to remember to take it off, or I've gone to some extreme where I think that a mask is going to protect me in my own car when I'm by myself.
Yes.
So feel free to judge.
Yes. So So,
Oh,
yeah.
but I did want to say this. I will mask if someone's uncomfortable.
Right.
So I was in a group of people. We weren't sitting close together. We didn't have, and everybody was vaccinated. And I said, are we all comfortable with masks on, masks off? What do you guys want to do? Everybody in the room decided to unmask, so we did. And then one person came late with the mask on, and I told that person, I said, if you can keep your mask on or you can take it off, it doesn't matter to us. If you would feel more comfortable with us wearing masks, we'll all put them on. And she said, no, I'm fine. And she wore her mask and we didn't. None of us got COVID. We all were fine.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, not being judgmental is helpful if one can manage that. And the problem with trying to shame somebody or berate someone for some perceived flaw that they have is that generally is an ineffective method of getting people to change. It's emotionally satisfying to berate people, to call them stupid, to say mean things to them, to try to humiliate them, all of that. But I mean, and if that's your goal, if that's all you want to do is make the other person feel as bad as you can possibly make them feel, then I guess you're achieving what you want, which is horrific, quite frankly. But if your goal is to affect change, then you've got to stop and think, okay, what is going to be an effective technique to help them move from where they are to where they need to be? And that should be more the sense that we have as we're dealing with someone that has a behavior or is making a choice that we think is not a good idea. With your small child, you are big enough to, you don't want to carefully reason them away from putting their hand in a fireplace or something, or running out in the street to play a game. But with adults and more normal sorts of questions, try to think in terms of what's going to be an effective technique of getting them to change.
if it won't work on a 12-year-old that won't clean the room, it's not going to work on somebody who's a stranger or is, some member of your family that's not real super close to you. So that's kind of the litmus test. Would this work on my 12-year-old who won't clean the room? No, then don't try it on strangers, because they have less investment in you than
Your 12-year-old
than your
kid.
12-year-old.
So it may be emotionally satisfying to say nasty things about people that are behaving in a way that you think is bad, but it's not effective. It's not useful. And ultimately, I mean, again, what is it that you want to see happen? What we would prefer is that people, that everybody would get the vaccine. We would prefer that everybody would make good choices all the time. And so think in terms of, what's the most effective way of achieving that end? Not what's going to make me feel better and more superior to the stupid idiot that won't do what's obvious.
And then there are some people who can take the vaccine.
Yes.
We have a friend who is a transplant patient, and all of his doctors have told him under no circumstances is he to take the vaccine, because there was some amount of transplant patients who had had the vaccine and died within hours. So they're telling transplant patients, I don't know if it matters what kind of transplant, not to take the vaccine.
And there are a certain percentage of people that are not
can't
able
take
to
it.
take vaccines,
Right.
which is part of the reason why most people should take it, because then we are protecting them
those that can't.
that can't.
Right. But this idea that everybody should be vaccinated, because if someone's unvaccinated and you just assume they're a jerk and
idiot.
uneducated, then you could be thinking wrong. Like our friend who, haven't taken the vaccine. What's wrong with you? Are you crazy? Are you stupid? What's your problem? Well, no, he's a transplant patient.
And he's doing what his doctor told him to do.
So, and then you go, oh, okay. So, with the unvaccinated people, and I know some of them have very unusual ideas.
That's a kind way of putting it.
Well, I was trying to be diplomatic. Unusual ideas about the vaccine, and why they shouldn't take it. But they have to they have to decide for themselves. If you don't take the polio vaccine, you have to accept the fact that you might get polio. If you don't take the MMR, you have to accept the fact that you might get measles, mumps, or rubella. That's part of life. Now, the hard part about it is with measles, and probably with the other two, the mumps and the rubella, you can probably give it to someone else. I mean, I know with measles you can give it to someone else.
Yes.
So, and that's also the case with COVID, is if you aren't vaccinated and you do get, well, I guess if you get COVID and you are vaccinated, you could still pass it on. But anyway.
Your odds of getting it, though, are not
right.
high.
It lowers your chances of having it, therefore lowers the chances you'll infect someone else.
Right.
But we are supposed to love other people. So judging someone because they're not taking the vaccine, even if the reasons are stupid, just be like, okay. So
you can think in your head that they're a moron, but don't.
No, because that's not having the right attitude. Jeez.
Yeah.
I've given you all permission, though, to judge me, so feel free to judge. So.
Oh, dear. Yeah.
So then, anytime someone in the public eye calls for shunning people or not giving them medical care because of it, those people are clearly wrong.
Yes.
Based on this biblical principle.
Loving
Although,
your neighbor as yourself.
right, if they're not a believer, you would expect them to respond that way. And you would have to handle them more as an unbeliever than as a believer who's just acting
right,
hatefully.
And see, one of the problems, too, is that as human beings will also tend to compartmentalize things. That is, the same people that are happy to shun, say, people that are not vaccinating themselves, would be horrified by the idea of, say, a religious group shunning some member for some behavior.
Right.
And so that's an inconsistency in the attitude. That is, shunning in and of itself is not a good idea.
And it doesn't ever
matter
bring
what
the
the
person
cause is.
to your side.
No, it doesn't. All it does is it hardens them.
Yes. Like, well, fine, if you're going to be a jerk, then I'll just go on my merry way.
Yes. Yeah, if you want someone to completely reject your point of view, this is a good way to do it. If you want them not to get vaccinated, shunning them is a way to achieve that goal. I don't think that's what your goal should be, or is, actually. That is, it's counterproductive. It may be emotionally satisfying. You feel good because you're superior to the moron. But, yeah, it's just not effective. Beyond the concept of loving your neighbor as yourself, part of the reason loving your neighbor as yourself is the core of the biblical message is because that's the best way to make life pleasant. That is, if you want to maximize human potential, if you want to maximize joy and happiness and satisfaction in the world, this is the way you achieve that. It's not just because, well, it's a good thing to do and blah, blah, blah. It's from a practical standpoint. It is the most effective, best way of living. But we're very bad at it.
And it's interesting, too, because if you look at, I like to call them the woke folks, I think that part of their motivation is to show more love and acceptance towards previously marginalized groups.
Right.
It's backfiring on them because they're actually creating more division than they are unity. But I think what we all want in life, and I think this comes from us basically from creation, the way we were supposed to live, is just you want to be loved and accepted and left alone to live your life. And all earthly efforts to do that fail.
Yeah, well, see, the fundamental flaw, I've talked about this before. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, theologian, or he was a pastor actually, did theology on the side.
Because pastors don't do anything with theology.
No, nothing at all. But he was a Lutheran pastor, and he's known primarily because of his resistance to Hitler and involving himself in the attempt to assassinate him, and then ending up getting executed by the Nazis about 2 weeks before the end of the war. Anyway, in his book Ethics, essentially he argues in the book that the best ethics is no ethics, because as human beings we were not supposed to ever think in those kind of categories. And this actually is the fundamental flaw in human beings. As God told Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's not just that we were prohibited from knowing about evil, we weren't supposed to know about good either. That is, we weren't supposed to think in those kind of categories. We were simply supposed to love each other. And if all you do is focus on how can I help this person, how can I love this person, what can I do for you, if everybody is thinking that way, then everybody is going to be blissfully happy, because all your needs will be automatically met, because that's what everybody's doing, is trying to meet everybody's needs. But we don't live in that world, unfortunately. We live in a world where we think in terms of, well, this is good and this is bad. And so we can't help but, okay, it's bad that these people are being marginalized, and those people who are doing the marginalizing are bad, and so we will criticize and condemn them and make them feel bad. And we'll try to help these people, make them feel better. Now I feel better, but it's all based on, is this good, is this bad? And it just creates this horrible atmosphere of condemnation and hatred, and it encourages the opposite of love when you start thinking in the categories of good and bad, which you wouldn't think that would be the case.
Right. Oh, interesting story. It was in the Wall Street Journal with Facebook trying to make it a gentler, kinder place. It actually backfired and made Facebook hateful. So there's a good example for you of the total backfire.
Yeah, well, it's
the big backfire. Yeah. Instead of the big lie, the big backfire.
Yeah, well, that's common. That is, you have the cliche that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and there are commonly unexpected consequences to what we do. That is, we do something because we think this will be good, this will help, and then some horrible thing happens instead, which we didn't anticipate. And that happens all the time. And again, it's a consequence of the fact that we are fundamentally flawed and broken, in the sense that we cannot look at the world in any other way than in the categories of good and evil.
But there's some part of us that desires that.
Right.
Just like there's a part of us that desires to live for eternity.
Yes.
By, having transplants and chemotherapy and all these things to extend life. We want to live forever.
We expect to live forever. We don't understand why we can't.
Right. And when you do die, like, whoa, I guess I wasn't going to live forever either, just like every person that died before me.
Right. But we all have this illusion in our heads that, somehow we're going to avoid this fate. Because that's, accepting the biblical picture of things, that was the original intent, that we would be immortal and that we would be motivated entirely by love for one another. I mean, you think about popular songs and the focus on love, all the world needs now is love, sweet love, and, make love, not war, and all these different cliches. That is, we have a fundamental understanding that somehow that's the most important thing. I taught this Sunday in the sermon, I'll be talking a little bit in the introduction.
Spoiler alert.
About the Harry Potter novels. And Harry Potter novels are explicitly Christian. I mean, she did it on purpose. There's 7 books in the series, paralleling the 7 books in...
Is she a believer?
As far as I know.
Okay.
And the Chronicles of Narnia, which was written by C.S. Lewis, that has 7 books in it. Chronicles of Narnia are quite Christian. And love is a primary thing in the Harry Potter novels. Plus, of course, Harry is kind of a messianic figure. And you have the concept of redemption and forgiveness and just all the things that you would expect from Christianity. Plus, then she actually quotes from Scripture a couple times, particularly in the last novel. So, I mean, that's just part of it. And so even on a popular literary level, movie level, you still see love as being a very important thing. And yet we all know that we fail miserably at it. I mean, even in interpersonal relationships, that is, people get married because they love each other, and yet what percentage of marriages fail? Even though it was founded supposedly on love, and yet somehow that falls apart. We're just really bad at that. Mm-hmm. But that was the fundamental point. And so what would Jesus do? I mean, if nothing else, you could answer the question by saying he would love you. Mm-hmm. What would Jesus do? He would love his neighbor as himself. This is what God does. That is, he loves us the same way we love ourselves. He loves us better than we love ourselves.
And if you look too, like Jesus hung out with, as they would say in Moulin Rouge, the drug addicts and the hookers.
Yes.
And
all the people that the respectable sorts would shun.
But then the people that he spoke out against were the religious leaders, who were the good people and were the ones who people looked up to and were supposed to try to be like.
Yes.
The woman at the well, he told her, you've had more than one husband and the guy you're currently with is not your husband. Did he tell her how horrible she is and that she's terrible and unlovable? No. He shared the gospel with her, and she ended up being a huge influence on the people of that area coming to know Christ, because she said he knew all about me and he forgave my sins. So these people that try to put themselves up kind of in a Pharisaical position where, well, I'm better than you, I'm vaccinated, you're not, I'm better than you, whatever, they're Pharisees, and Jesus would speak out against them. So speaking out against those people would be acceptable. But to love the people that have chosen not, let's just call vax versus non-vax kind of the Pharisee versus non-Pharisee thing, to love them in spite of that. Another example from today, I was talking to someone else, and we were talking about the split that's going on with a couple of denominations, particularly on the East Coast, over same-sex marriage, which I can't believe that's still a discussion, but apparently it is. Same-sex marriage and, what was the other thing? Same-sex marriage and something else that the churches are actually splitting, or the denominations are actually splitting on those lines. And my argument would be, if you do believe, and I'm not trying to say what my position is on this, but if you do believe that homosexuality is a sin, then who should you be loving? You should be loving the people that are caught and lost in that sin, and loving them and letting God work on their hearts. You're not the Holy Spirit, you let God work on them. Same thing with anything else that you view as a sin. If you think that someone who's not vaccinated is sinful, then you pray for them and you love them, and you let God work on them. If you think that someone who has the vaccine is sinful, you pray for them, you love them, and you let God work on them, although you can't unvaccinate yourself.
Yeah.
But it's just about loving people and accepting them where they are. Mm-hmm. You don't, when I went to the gym and had a personal trainer, it wasn't because I was buff and thin. I was fat and out of shape, and like I am now. Obviously it didn't work. Actually worked for a little while, became a little bit of a gym rat for a while. But you don't, like, a personal trainer isn't very effective if they get somebody who's already buff. Mm-hmm. But you take somebody that's...
Well, as Jesus said, it's the sick that need the...
Right. Exactly. It's
healing.
The sick that need doctors, not the healthy.
Yeah.
So,
And Jesus came to the sick and the sinners and all the...
And with the kids that we're getting this year, after being on distance learning, some of them couldn't connect or didn't connect pretended to connect. So we have some kids that are really low, especially in math. My math scores are the lowest I've ever seen across the board. And but that's what I'm there for. I'm there to teach kids and to improve their knowledge.
Yes.
You know, I don't like being a prison warden, so kids that like to fight and cause problems, not a fan, because I'm there. I'm a teacher, not a prison warden. So if I get a kid who is low, who can't read, can't do math, that is like my job. I'm not a babysitter, so it is my job to bring them up from where they were to wherever they can be after 180 days. And that's the part of my job I love. I hate the discipline. I mean, there's a certain amount of discipline when you have a group of people, but especially small people. But the really big behaviors like fighting and problems on the playground, that's not really my jam. I would rather that kind of stuff go away and just deal with the learning issues, because that's what I do. And so if your job, well, all of our job is to love people, and particularly people that are steeped in sin, you can do that, and it's much easier to do with someone who is clearly not wanting to make good choices than it is someone who is, well, I'm the best person, and I do this, and I do that, and I give money to this. It's really hard to win somebody that's already a good person because they don't feel the need for Christ. People who are lost, like truly lost, really feel the need for Christ. And those are the ones that Jesus would spend time with and create a relationship with.
But he also had a relationship with people on the other end,
right.
too.
Well, you don't act hatefully towards
No.
them. But
Nicodemus is a good example of that. And as an example of a contrast, that is, a teacher will work very hard to take care of a student that isn't very good and will invest a lot of time and energy in that. If you have a student on the other end of the spectrum that is just naturally really smart, it's a mistake to ignore them.
right. And I'm not saying to ignore that child.
I know you're not. And so, for instance, when I was in high school, this was back in the dark ages before AP classes, I was in something called Honors English. And so it's already a group of students that are fairly high functioning. And the teacher happened to notice that I needed more stimulation than what even that was giving me. And so while the rest of the class only had to read, one of Shakespeare's plays, and only had to read one of Ibsen's plays, I had to read all of Shakespeare's plays. I had to read all of Ibsen's plays. Plus I had to read all the plays of another colleague of his and write papers on all of them. And that was good for me. That is, I appreciated it and enjoyed it and got a lot of good out of it. And so he was a very good teacher, obviously, because he not only took care of the students that were in greater need on the lower end,
right.
He also took care of those of us that were on the other side, too.
Right.
And that's what we see with Jesus. He spent time with the prostitutes and the tax collectors and other unsavory sorts of people, but he also, when Nicodemus, who was a member of the Sanhedrin, came to him, he spent time with him, talked to him, helped him get to where he needed to be. So, anyway.
Yeah. No, and I totally agree with that. What's interesting, though, is that we've been told since then to not give just extra work to the smart kids because it turns a lot of them off.
Yeah.
We have to give them more, we have to take the same work and make it more intricate for them. So like my little girl that's really smart in my class, she didn't know her times tables 3 weeks ago. She knows them now. She taught herself. I gave her that's where they all need to get by the end of the year. She got there in a month.
Yes.
She mastered her addition, subtraction, and multiplication facts in roughly the first month of school, and taught herself. And then she told me, she says, I need more because she's been reading extra books and things like that. Not that I assigned to her, it's just kind of to keep her busy. And so I showed her code.org, which in a sense is more work, but it's a different way to use the abilities that she has. And so I showed it to her and I said, so coding is like how they make games work. And she goes, this is my dream job. I said, well, anytime you finish your work, you can go on code. And man, she has not asked me for one extra thing to do. She's like, what do I do now? It's no, she's got her nose in code.org. She came to me one day this week and she goes, I can't figure out how to do this one thing. And I said, well, watch the video again because they show them how to do it. I said, then just try it. Try things and figure it out. I said, you'll use that higher order thinking of yours. Yeah. She is not a problem. A lot of times the smarter kids will be the big behavior problems because not so much because they're bored, because a truly gifted kid will find ways to keep themselves occupied. It may be with trouble,
yes,
but
that is an
yeah,
option.
but it's their way of keeping their mind stimulated.
Yes.
So if you can stimulate it another way, like with him, the perfect thing to do was give him just oodles more reading and writing to do because that's his jam.
Right.
With her, it was to give her coding to do, which I just happened to ask her, to show her. None of the other kids even know she's doing it. But none of them has said, why is she playing Minecraft and we can't,
Well, the other students didn't know all the extra stuff I was doing.
Yeah.
Didn't matter.
Right. But with a lot of gifted kids, if you get, now with her, I probably could have given her book reports to do and she wouldn't have cared. She's kind of like you in that respect. Yeah. But I wanted something that was going to use that higher order thinking without like creating more work. It's kind of more, it's more gamified. The code.org is really gamified. So it's fun and it's challenging. Yes. So it wasn't really like giving her extra
practical benefits for her too. Ultimately, I mean, if that's what she's interested in doing, is ending up, programming.
I told her work on this through 3rd and 4th grade, and you can go to work instead of going to 5th grade, and she laughed. So, but we're almost done.
Yes, we are.
So that was a fun discussion.
Yep.
And Oreo's wide awake. I really thought he was going to bite you. You kept moving your hand past his face. I was waiting for him to go for you, and he didn't.
That's good.
Yeah, so he's really well behaved. So.
At least at the moment.
Say hi to the people. Hi, I'm Oreo.
He still
I'm
doesn't
cute,
like
but
me,
I have a bad attitude.
Yeah, I don't think he likes me.
He loves me.
Yeah, well.
So next week we will be back with
Doomed as doomed can
Oh,
be.
yes.
Are we doomed?
Are we doomed as doomed can be?
Yes.
Yes. So that'll be next Saturday at 4 Pacific time.
Yeah.
And hope you'll join us. Share this webcast with your friends if you think they would be interested in any of the topics. Robin has 2 books out right now. This one is Afraid of the Dark. What
suffering tells us
about God. I can't see it.
Huh.
I always remember I always forget the subtitle on it. I got to move the barrier or the banner. Yes, it is a barrier. So anyway, that's available on Amazon. We're doing it in Sunday school right now. It's really good. Then the other one is the Bible in One Verse, and this is really good too. It's got questions at the end if you want to do it in a small group Bible study, or just do it on your own. That's fine. But this is a lot of what we talk about is the Bible in One Verse. So those books are both available on Amazon along with his other books that he's written, and I would encourage you to get a copy if you know of someone that might be interested in that topic. You can recommend the book to them or buy it for them as a gift.
Yes.
Make a lovely Halloween gift, since that's the next holiday coming up.
And if you visit Amazon, you'll find other books that I've written besides those two.
You just have to spell our last name right, which is not always easy. Do you know that the L is missing on your name right there?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Typo.
Might need to fix that.
Perhaps so.
So even he can't spell his name right.
Well, it's called a typo.
He can't spell his own name. And he's had this name for over 60 years. Me, on the other hand, almost 40. Hey, you just blanked me out.
I'm just so you can point out the error. Oops. There.
No, you got to get rid of both of them.
I get rid of both of them.
So there it is. Down at the bottom, there should be an L between the E and the H.
Yes, but you'll notice on this one, I spelled it right.
Yes, so you
there
can
you go.
Take a picture of this on your screen, and then take a picture of the other one. But remember, this is the one how to spell our last name, not the other way. Whatever. As if. Yes. Anyway, so we will see you guys next Saturday. And have a great week. And remember to love others as you love yourself. Have a good one, guys. Say bye, Oreo. Bye, Oreo.
Bye.
Say goodnight, Gracie. Good night, Gracie. Ow.